Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the UCFB Applicant Experience Series. My name's Andy Speed, and I'm a member of the Future Students team here at UCFB, and it's my job this afternoon to host you through this session. This afternoon, we're going to be kicking off the second part of our Applicant Experience Series with our Industry Speaker Week. This afternoon, we're going to be joined by industry leaders to learn more about their current roles, their experiences in the industry, their advice to you in forging your own career in the sports industry, as well as some other interesting bits and pieces. So before we start, just as per normal, a couple of little bits of housekeeping for you all. So first off, this session is being recorded. So if any of you wish to view this again after the fact, it will be live on our Applicant Experience Hub for you to do that or to share with friends, family, etc. You can do that. If you need or want to change your view of how you view this session or how the speakers show on your screen, there's a little grey or black box circle in the bottom right hand corner of your sort of page, your screen there, that you just have to click and change and pick the view that's most appropriate for you. And last but not least, as in the last sessions that you would have attended with us, on the left hand side there's a little chat window that one of my colleagues has already typed in for you that we'll be using in order for you to ask your questions to our panelists and to interact with us during the session. So just familiarise yourself with that little text box on the left, find it, get a little message in there to the team so that we know that you can see it, and then we know that you can engage with us properly throughout this. So this afternoon, we're going to be joined by three guest speakers who I'm going to introduce to you now. So our first guest speaker today is Chris Wynn. Chris is an experienced football business consultant who joined UCFB after several years in the Deloitte Sports Business Group. During his time at Deloitte, Chris worked with leading football clubs, associations and governing bodies around the world and specialised in governance, risk management and financial regulation of football clubs. And welcome, Chris. He's on screen now.
Thank you, Andy. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. Next up is Tom Rowell. Tom is currently Head of Marketing, Ticketing and International at Everton Football Club. He's a breadth of experience working from within the football industry, having previously worked in a marketing function at Hull, Doncaster Rovers, Birmingham City, Wolves, Leicester City. And there's Tom for us there. So welcome, Tom. Thanks for joining us. Excellent. And last but by no means least, we've got Dimitri Zenetos. I hope I've pronounced that correctly for us this afternoon. So Dimitri is a professional strategic planner and program management expert, currently working as a strategic advisor for the Arab Gulf Cup Football Federation, whilst previously heading the strategic planning and corporate systems department for the Qatar Football Association, directly supporting the QFA President's Office for Strategy and Institutional Development. And that wasn't the easiest to complete saying. So thank you for joining us this afternoon, Dimitri, all the way from over there in Qatar. Thank you. Excellent, thank you. So just to reiterate to our viewers this afternoon, answering questions that you put to our panelists in and amongst the other questions that we will be asking them that we've pre-assigned for this session. So use that chat box carefully and get those key questions in so that we can get them answered for you and you can make the most out of this session. So without sort of wasting any more time, let's get into the real sort of body of this and get involved with the Q&A session. So thanks everyone again for joining us this afternoon. Chris, just a heads up, you're first on the list here for the first question this afternoon. Big one for everyone in and around football at the moment, but as a finance professional, what does the immediate future of the football industry look like following this pandemic?
Yeah, great question, and one that if I had the magical answer to, I'm sure I'd be a multimillionaire in advance of it. The issues we find ourselves in at the moment are that a lot of the given revenue streams that you'd expect, match day being the be-all and end-all right now, granted in terms of what we're missing, but even broadcast rebates, commercial rebates have heavily impacted on what you call contractual wage expenditure, contractual other expenditure as well, which is a bit more difficult to shift in the absence of usually pretty reliable revenue streams. And as a result of that, that's left a lot of clubs in probably high levels of debt for a start, especially given the fact that a lot of the bailouts, the loans that we're seeing going down to the EFL levels especially have been based on loans, advanced levels of income. And what that's going to mean is that going forward, we may see the knock-on effect of additional levels of debt, maybe less capital available for projects or player transfers that might have been usually available for those initiatives. And as such, clubs may be not reining in the purse strings entirely, because in the last transfer window in January we saw pretty decent levels of spend sort of across the 2021 season, that is. But going forward, the potential that the clubs may need to rein things back a little bit as a result of those levels of debt, those repayments, as well as any advanced income that's come their way in the here and now the last few months, which they're not going to get in the future now instead. So again, a shortfall to come. So while hopefully, all being well, it feels like we're maybe on our way out of the pandemic, the financial effects of it might be felt for a little bit more time to come yet.
I think that's a really good point there. Tom, just going to head to you now next, if you don't mind. Just same line of questioning really, but with sort of your marketing ticketing hat on as such. How do you see that affecting from that perspective?
Yeah, again, really good question and really challenging. I think, all clubs at the moment, the ones I sort of speak to in the Premier League, are trying to second guess where we're going to be in August, because obviously that's the next step for us is get back to, games for next season. And again, the difference in options is vast. Normally you're looking at, maybe 2 or 3% of a variation in sales or something like that, whereas this year we could be going from as little as a phased return approach of 5,000 fans, 10,000 fans, all the way up to full crowds with full away fans. And that's what's so the difference is huge. I've never had a season where there is so much uncertainty at this late in the year. By now we'd have been most of the way through our season ticket renewal period. We'd normally finish our season tickets in April, and then job done for next year pretty much. Whereas, obviously for this year we haven't started because we don't know what we're doing. There's that hesitation of do you sell a season ticket and then have to refund it next year and go through, as Chris will know, the huge amount of work to take the money up front from a cash flow perspective. But then obviously if you're going to refund it anyway throughout the season, that becomes just as complicated, and that has risks as well. So yeah, it's been hugely challenging. Like Chris said as well. Obviously things hoping to be improving, but again there's always that constant risk and slight doubt, isn't there? And for us, when we're selling 30,000 season tickets, the margin for error is pretty big. So yeah, taking it step by step, but hoping to have some good news in the next few weeks, I think, to start to plan a bit better.
Excellent. I think that point around the season tickets really interesting. I think it was this week West Ham started selling their season tickets, if I was right, and that I thought was a really bold move. So yeah, it's interesting to sort of hear that from you. Thank you very much, Tom. Dimitri, so with your sort of strategic advisor sort of hat on in this situation, let's have your sort of thoughts on what sort of advice you'd be giving to your clients, and I guess what advice you are giving to your clients in this current sort of circumstance.
No, for us, it's a weird scenario because here supposedly things were much better. So the crowd started opening up. We had crowds of 50% and over, especially for the last events in the FIFA Club World Cup that just happened here. But for example, I'll tell you, what do you do to a spectator when you say, you got a ticket, however, you have to do COVID, you have to do this, you have to do this, and the spectator is not going to come at the end. So what I do know, and I agree with Chris and Tom, it is affecting the budget. The purses are starting for here at least 6-7 months behind, and for me at a strategic level, it affects projects, it affects a commercial. Right now we're on talks with 2 big commercial entities for broadcasting rights for the next 5 tournaments, which is 6.5 years. How do you plan? How do you know that the figure they're giving you is a correct figure? It's a very, very difficult scenario, especially when you don't have fans. And how much can you do virtual, and how much can you expect to have no fans in the crowds? And it's not worth it. You might just give it to broadcaster and have them do broadcasting rights. It's a very difficult scenario. But at a project level, I think I disagree with the guys. The purses for us is already closed. The budgets are gone. They will not even touch anything new or any new idea until next year.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Dimitri. That's really useful. Thanks for that, guys, for that question. We're on to the next question now. You've all been involved in sort of the sports industry in your various roles for various periods of time. I guess excluding sort of the recent circumstances and the pandemic. Tom, I'm going to go to you on this first. How have you seen the industry change across your sort of career and the time you've had in the different roles you've had?
Yeah, good question. So I started out after I completed my master's in marketing at Leicester City. So that was back in 2012. So this was, just to give a context of how long ago that was, they were in the Championship at that time. So yeah, this was a couple of years before winning the Premier League, which no one would have foresaw at that point. So yeah, that's just back in 2012. So again, I think the main one from my perspective, particularly from a marketing point of view, is just the use of data. I think, again, this is probably across lots of industries, but particularly in football now, it's become, rather than sort of bullet point number 4 on the conversation list, it's normally the first conversation. And again, Dimitris will know from a commercial perspective, this is the first question that people are asking now is, how much do you have? How much can you collect? How deep is the data? So these are the questions that now the first level of conversation before you get to, what can we do at the event, or how do we activate at the stadium? It's like, how much data can I get, and how good is it? And that's how things have changed. So when I joined Leicester, I was CRM exec, and I was one. It was a team of one, and that was it. We had a fairly basic system, and it worked. We could send emails, but that was about it really. So if I look at how they as a team have evolved, but obviously just in my time in that 8 years, the teams now are like 5, 6, 7, and they're a lot more sophisticated, and we're using a lot more technology that you would find from Chris's background, like banking or statistics and modelling and that sort of stuff. It's become because it was always on the pitch side, so we've always had first team analysts and sports science analysts, but that is now moving into business. So we now have like a lot more BI stuff. The level of software we're using is more sophisticated, and a lot more of the decision making now is using data. Whereas again, back in the day, not necessarily just at Leicester, but back at that period of time, there was a lot more, chairman or chief exec intuition behind decisions, as opposed to actually looking at statistics or data. It was very much, my gut says do it this way, or in the past we did it that way, so let's do that again, rather than actually looking at, but is that going to work, or what's the data saying? So my perspective has been lots of changes about data. Is probably the main one that I've noticed the most.
That's really interesting, and I think just a slight follow-on for you there, Tom, with that. I think you're right. Everyone does sort of assume that data analysis belongs on the pitch predominantly when you're talking about sport. For our viewers out here, can you give them a little flavour of what, when you mention sort of boardroom data, what sort of stuff you're talking about?
What does it fans?
Yeah, in terms of any data that they might be sort of looking at, just give them a little flavour of what that might sort of look like.
Yeah, absolutely. So it covers all the sort of main areas. So obviously demographic, behavioural. So again, purchase behaviour is obviously the main one that every club will have. What ticketing products they buy, when they buy, do they come with others? Obviously that runs across memberships, tickets, season tickets. But then we have obviously stuff like retail, purchase history, which is important. But now we're adding into that more the engagement metrics. So stuff like, have you downloaded the app? How long do you spend on the app? What bits do you look at? Web traffic, again, all that will plug back in. Obviously now looking at even social tools to a degree in terms of social listening stuff, in terms of your what's called like engagement with the club, in terms of your perception of the club, positive or negative, and that sort of stuff. So it's all starting to broaden up. Again, back in the day, it was very much, are they a season ticket holder or not? That was basically as crude as it got. Whereas now it's become hugely more detailed. We overlay Experian data sometimes in terms of mosaics of people's socioeconomic background, stuff we factor in. Obviously with the new stadium we're developing, we've had to do a lot of extra work around affordability modelling for the new stadium. So if we're looking at adding an extra 10,000 seats at different prices, who's going to buy them? Are the people around? So again, probably leaning on Chris's background, we've worked with sort of big agencies and consultants to try and model that. How does that look for a new stadium? Where do we find these people? Is the economy strong enough to support that growth? So again, it's the level of detail is gone much more broad.
Excellent, thank you. I think that little bit of extra sort of depth of that was really, really good for that question. Thank you very much, Tom. Dimitri, come to you now if you don't mind. Just if you can add to that, really, what from your perspective, what's changed across the sports industry since you sort of began sort of where you are now?
Let me add on to that, because that's not my expertise, but I can tell you, when you talk about all these systems and all these performance metrics inside the field, customer and marketing outside the field, try to think of it, and I think this will interest the potential students, is how many different fields of work is open for sports as it's not only the field of play anymore. I will take it one step further. So I think that in my last, 15 years of working in sports, what I've seen also is a difference is many more sport events. So we were used to the big ones, the Olympics, the Formula One, the World Cup, the athletics, which is the Commonwealth Games, which is very, very important in the UK. So we know these big ones, but since the past 15 years, you hear a lot of other things like the one I'm working on, regional competition, multi-sport competition, multi-venue competition. I'm not even going to open the door of esports because we would be talking for a whole day on that alone. But it seems to me that not only does technology open the field for people wanting to work into sports in different level of sports, but it also, you have the opportunity. It's not the traditional big five anymore. And that's a wrong term because that goes to accounting firms. But it is not the big number. You will find jobs in a lot of regional competitions. If you want to wander across Europe, you'll find across the pond in Atlantic thousands of events in the Americas. But if you come to Asia, there's so many different events. And this is something we'll discuss about later, about how you network with these people, and you will continue to work with these people. So I agree with Tom, and Chris is probably going to talk more about finance on this, the data you get from these systems is cool, and it opened up new possibilities. But it's not only that, it's that you have a lot of events that are using these systems and these new technologies, and it brings a lot of people. And what I always say about sports, and I'll finish with this, unlike any other industry I've worked for, if you work in a sports event, you will work with every possible person across the spectrum. You will work with technology, you will work security, you'll work logistics, overlays, transport, ticketing. What am I forgetting? Construction, legal, everything. Everything is, when you do a multi-sport event, you'll have the chance to work across everybody. So when you have more technologies and more events, that grows exponentially the market for working in this industry.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dimitri. I think that's a really good point. Chris, I'm going to come to you now. I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit tricky. I want to ask you to sort of follow on from what both Tom and Dimitri were saying, but also if you can sort of go into the world of sort of football finance and its complexities, I guess, versus media expectation versus reality, sort of tied into that. So just take that another level, if you don't mind, Chris.
No, of course, I'll do my best to do that justice. I think the points made there were great as well. I mean, the commercial intricacies of the game have just completely exploded over the last decade or so, hence the mechanisms that Tom was mentioning there and why they're so important these days to understand your fan base and generate as much as you can out of them commercially, because that ultimately is an untapped revenue source if you do it right. And equally, as Dimitri says, there's the world of football and the business around it has grown so much over that decade at the same time that, yeah, the number of roles going across the board, not always obvious at the same time, have grown accordingly. Hence why this industry requires qualified individuals these days who have that background knowledge, expertise in the area, and they can apply it to the game accordingly. Now, from a financial perspective, yeah, as the game has grown, as it has in the last decade, huge broadcast deals have steadily increased across the board. Premier League especially, albeit in recent times slightly plateaued. UEFA level, the last cycle went up about 40% in terms of value as well, to I think it's at the moment about €2 billion worth of distributions per season. That's reflected again commercially as well, because the more that these teams are on television, the more interest there is in having your brand, your company name attached to these clubs for the affiliation, the revenue streams it brings with it by simply having your name on the advertising holdings, on the shirts, etc. Because the exposure, the global exposure now via those broadcast deals, means that it's such valuable inventory for you as a company to be involved if you've got the resource to do so. Granted, in COVID times, it might make it slightly more difficult. But alongside that, yes, the media interest that goes with it means that people want to understand what clubs are spending their money on. That's why the interest in club financials is so huge. I mean, if a small, medium-sized company that's not football publishes their financial results these days, apart from stakeholders, no one else is generally going to pay much attention. A football club puts their accounts out. Everybody in the world wants to know about it, what they're spending on the wages, where is the cost, the revenues going in terms of these huge broadcast deals, what they're spending it on, are they making a profit, is the owner putting stuff into the club? Fans are involved, they want to understand what's going on, but so do the stakeholders as well, because from their perspective, they want to ensure that, yes, the club is successful, but also a going concern going forward. So bringing it all together, that's why in the here and now, we've got things like financial regulation to kind of, it's meant to make sure that clubs are sustainable. We've got that media interest. I mean, when I was at Deloitte, the 2 publications we put out each year, huge global interest and exposure, simply because there is the appetite off the pitch as well as on it to understand exactly what clubs are spending their money on these days when there's so much money flying around.
Excellent. I think that's really good. And I've got a slight follow-on for you there. Can
I add something on that?
Yeah, go.
One of the best speeches we've ever heard is in the Middle East is a partner from Deloitte who does the annual report on football. So he comes in, and this is a big group. It's about 300 people. And he said, so you all work for football and you all want to become rich? And he asked the question, how much do you think football is worth as a product? And we couldn't put our finger on it. He goes, listen, on a normal year without a Ronaldo or a Messi moving around, on a normal year, it's about $5 to $6 billion as a product. And we're like, oh, well, he goes, you think that's long? It's big? Apple had $5 billion profit last year. So it's not that money. It's what you say. It's the interest of everybody and the love that we have for this sport that makes it so interesting. And everybody is looking with his microscope. It's amazing.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, if you compare football as an industry to retailers, globally known retailers, to automobile manufacturers, to aviation, tiny in comparison. But because the interest is so much and so focused, then yes, it appears to be huge. And granted, in the last decade, it has grown significantly compared to where it was, say, around 2010.
I think my follow-on question to that, which I'll go to you first, Chris, then Dimitri, then Tom, is I guess, to what extent is it important for these students and for our students to understand business foremost, followed by then the sector knowledge and everything else? Or do you disagree with what I've just said there in terms of that demand on them? So yeah, Chris, if I can go to you first, then Dimitri, then Tom.
Yeah, I think my mic's back on again. So ultimately, yes, as I kind of alluded to, because there is, relatively speaking, so much money flying around football these days, especially in the context of all the administrations we used to see, and even the more recent troubles of some of our clubs here in England, such as Bury and Bolton, it's becoming more and more important that individuals who are involved in the game have got a sound business hat on. That, granted, you might be in it for your heart because you enjoy football, you love it, you've got a passion for it, but you've also got to make sound business decisions. And it's the latter which ultimately ensures success in the long term, rather than the kind of passion focus, which is lovely, but at the same time can end up with clubs obviously getting into difficulty if they're overselling themselves in terms of expenditure versus resources at hand. So for me, absolutely, any kind of degree or program which is giving students a business background in their particular chosen field, be it finance, be it marketing, be it more of an international holistic approach, and combining that with the intricacies of the industry and applying it to the industry accordingly, is going to set them up very well when it comes to a practical, real world position within football, even if it's entry level to begin with, because you're going to have a lot to offer, which potentially others who haven't got that business skill set combined with that knowledge of how the industry actually works, maybe wouldn't have.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. Dimitri.
I couldn't agree more. And that's why I think in the past 15 years, you see a lot of people in our industry that have no idea about football. They don't like the game, for some of them, but they have come from business entities or from banks, where I came from a bank as well. And that's what drove us into the business, to make sound decisions. And it's one thing when we have a mature market, let's say like Europe. It's different for me in the past 12 years where in the Middle East, money has been unlimited. We were making events and people were not asking about ticketing revenues. They were not asking what's the break-even point. And this has changed. So there is a business element behind it that's seeping more and more, even to countries that didn't have any financial problems or funding problems. Couldn't agree more. You need the business background to come into this industry, or any industry of sport for that matter.
Thank you, Dimitri. Tom?
Yeah, I think I'd echo that. I think just to give it a bit of balance, I think also at the same time, I wouldn't overemphasize the need for everyone to be a generalist in all areas and be an expert at everything, because again, from like Dimitri said earlier, in terms of when you work in football, you come across every other department. That's very true. Like I say, on a daily basis, I will speak to HR experts, finance experts, tax experts. And again, the nature of those people is that they are the experts. So, I understand how it works broadly and I know what I need to do, but at the same time, no one person can be all of those things. And I think I wouldn't put too much pressure on people to be an amazing accountant as well as being amazing at marketing or being a creative person, because again, everyone has unique skill sets. So I think having a broad understanding of how business operates in terms of P&L and HR and finance is really important. But again, I think from that point onwards, you're going to end up having to pick one area probably to be an expert in, until you get back to the top again, in which case then you're across all of it. But I think as you go up, you're going to have to pick a path. And I think don't be put off by the idea that when you look at numbers, they just blur, because that's not, if you work in content, media, digital, and all these sorts of things, that's not going to be an issue for you. So again, don't be put off by, struggling with certain elements, but yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think that was a great answer from all three there. Tom, what you just said there leads on nicely to the next question, not the very next one, the next one for you, which is after I ask this next question of Dimitri, because I want to just quickly circle back, because you said something that I thought was really interesting there, Dimitri, about sort of the ticket revenues and what they're looking at and stuff like that around sort of the area you're working in. I guess there's two parts to this question for you. So looking at the events and things that you're organising or that you're involved with, how far in advance is sort of planning started for these sorts of major events? And I guess the second part of the question there is, what measures of success are used around that with you if you're not looking at sort of the financial aspects of that, sort of with the clients that you've got there?
Oh, it's a very easy question on the first part. Never enough. Never have enough time for planning. I can't describe how many times we wanted more time and more time. And it goes to, you don't want to be extreme. So when I was talking to colleagues who are working for the FIFA World Cup, for 2022, when 7 and 8 years ago, and I was finishing the Asian Cup, which is the reason I came from London here, they were like working 12 and 14 hours days. I'm like, that's not normal. That's not normal 8 years in advance of a tournament, even if it's a FIFA tournament, that you're working so many hours. So I don't know if we want to put like a balanced line. I think 3-4 years before any big event is a good time to plan, to set up your organization. About a year before, this is an Olympic term, but I'll use it. You do your venuization, which means starting working at the venue. It's not a true English word, but that's when you just move from fantasy and computer world into the real. You don't have a computer every day. Everybody's running around the venue, and you do normal day-to-day experience. But I will catch this last point that you said. How do you know you succeeded? Okay, so when it comes to football events, yes, the crowd and the media will always play the big role. The sponsors will say if it's a good event or not. I think, though, the hidden elements is where you need to pay attention. And then this, again, comes from my Olympic background. The legacy that you leave behind, the knowledge, the volunteers database. For example, in Greece, in the Olympics in Greece, we had a volunteers database, never existed before in history. In Qatar, we have around 40 to 50,000 volunteers database that the FIFA World Cup just picked up and used. Elements like this is where you know if an event is. Yes, it's a beautiful venue. Yes, it's the know-how and knowledge of people staying. But the legacy that you see behind is the knowledge that you see, the local talent. And to me, one of the biggest ones is the volunteers. It's the hidden elements. You can't see them. You can't put numbers on those.
Excellent. I think that's a really great answer. Thanks, Dimitri. I'm glad I circled back to you there on that one. Tom, I'm now going to circle back to your sort of point you were making in terms of you were sort of highlighting the sort of the need for specialism sometimes and not the generalist approach. So let's have a quick chat about your specific role that you've got there. Let's talk through. Let's put a bit of context on this. So let's talk about a typical campaign at Everton around sort of ticketing and reselling sort of season tickets, because we mentioned that before. Let's talk about that and talk us through what that looks like and how that sort of happens.
Again, really good points. I think, normally for us with season tickets, we tend to start in the sort of late August, September of the season before. So it's almost a 9-month process, end to end. So it seems, once we start the first season, we're starting again with the following year's season. It never seems to really end. It's kind of a constant rolling sort of strategy for us. So we start with the insight side of stuff. So again, we look at the results of the previous year's campaign. So, what was the retention rate like? What sort of people did we lapse? Is there a pattern of the sort of people that aren't coming back? Is it, based on age? Is it location? So again, we do a lot of risk profiling and try and come up with, a bit of an understanding of why people aren't renewing. Again, in the past, when I first started football, there was a lot of just assumption about that. Oh, it's because we had a bad year, or it's because of this. It's like, there's a lot more to it than that. It's very rarely actually about form. We tend to find that the renewal rate isn't necessarily always linked to on the pitch. I think a lot of it is just down to other practical factors like families or moving away or jobs and that sort of stuff. So we try and understand what worked and didn't work from the previous campaign, and then that starts our information for the following year. So there's a lot of work that goes into the data side. Again, obviously from a finance point of view, there's conversations around budget. So again, are the prices right? Do we need to try and look at raising some more money? What's the best way to do that without raising all the prices? Is there a way we can maintain the bottom price and the top price and try and find it in the middle? There's lots of conversations around kind of the money area. And then from there onwards, obviously that leads into the creative process. So once we have a brief for the campaign as a whole, so right, we need to do this, that then becomes part of the creative process for us. Is there a creative hook or a strategy or a visual approach that lends itself to what we need to do? Is it reinforcing the quality on the pitch? Do we champion the players? Is it more around the positivity towards the club? Do we highlight other areas? So again, that's something that is still quite formulaic in football, is the creative approach of just showing goals and just showing players celebrating. And it's like, it does have an emotive response, but people expect more than that now from football clubs. They are more sophisticated products, and the marketing should be more sophisticated than purely just, here's a goal, that'll keep you happy, buy something. Like, there needs to be a bit more sophistication to that, because again, not everyone buys actually for that reason. Some people love the day out, irrespective of the result. Some people love the social element of it. So again, try and find what hits those different audiences. And our campaigns tend to be quite multi-layered. So again, not everyone will see the same creative, and they won't receive the same video, they won't receive the same copy. We even write copy different for different audiences. So again, that's become much more sophisticated than in the past. Again, in the past, it would have been, here's one image, here's the copy, etc. So again, much more effort goes into it. And then from the launch perspective, again, this is where the CRM and data side kicks in. So a lot of the comms are pre-programmed. There's a lot of automated journeys. So if you open the email but don't buy, that triggers a second email, which then triggers an SMS or triggers a phone call and that sort of stuff. So it's a lot more sophisticated, but actually at a much less cost. So in the past, season ticket campaigns were very direct mail based. So a huge amount of cost, printing, postage, fulfillment. You'd send one letter, wait a while, send another letter, and this would cost, a lot of money. Whereas now there's an investment in the software of the CRM and the licenses, but actually over a whole campaign will save money because it's just a lot more digital. So yeah, they've again, season tickets are one example of a campaign that has changed a lot over that time and become a lot more sophisticated. But it's a year-round thing, really. It never really stops, because as soon as you start, like I say, you start looking at the results and then carry on again for next year.
That makes complete sense. Yeah, I guess let's dig into that slightly more, not directly but indirectly. You're clearly a specialist within the sports marketing side of things, and you've chosen to specialize down that route as opposed to sort of any of the other areas. Can you talk to us a little bit about sort of why and why particularly sports rather than any other industry with sort of your level of expertise and sort of knowledge?
Yeah, your question frames it like it was a strategic and very sensible deliberate choice, which it definitely wasn't. So my initial degree was in international relations and politics, and I ended up working in retail, as you would do with that sort of degree. So I think I kind of went down that path, and I got to the age of 26 and just decided that I need to have a bit of a change, a bit of a redirection. So I went back to uni to my master's at the age of 26 in marketing, and then from then it kind of led to this. So it was a kind of bit of a sliding doors moment of a parallel universe that I could be in at the moment. But yeah, I think marketing was something I enjoyed at school. I just didn't necessarily want to do business studies back then because it was quite a general subject and a lot of people did it. So I thought I'd try something a bit different, and didn't really work out. So ended up going back in to do the marketing masters, and then off the back of that, again, sport was never something. I've always been a football fan since a kid, but even when I was doing that masters, I didn't even think about applying for sports jobs. It didn't really cross my mind, to be honest. But through a really random LinkedIn connection and seeing a post that then got me an interview at an agency, which then got me an interview at Leicester City, and it literally just completely one of those things that just happens sometimes. And then from then, like I say, I was at Leicester for just over a year, then Wolves for just a year, blah, 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 blah. And it's just snowballed from there, really. So it's one of those, I've worked hard. I'm not going to put it all down to luck, but sometimes these things just kind of come your way. So yeah, it was a deliberate choice to do marketing. Obviously the ticketing element I've picked up in my last couple of roles. I think the two are quite linked. I think the product is ticketing. So when you sell, if you're marketing a product, if I work for Mars Bars, ticketing is almost the product. That's what you're producing. So it's a big part of the mix when you talk about the 4 Ps and that sort of stuff. Ticketing is the product part, really. So that kind of fell into it. In terms of the international, again, that's just naturally grown because as we do more and more globally, marketing drives international stuff. And I think that's, as a marketer, I'm slightly biased, but I think in most organizations, marketing tends to be the driver for strategy. So if you look at most strategy departments of a business, they're normally quite heavily marketing led because that's going to get you to where you need to get to. So I think I've probably become a lot broader in that time. Like I said, I know a lot more than I want to know about HR through having to deal with a lot of, I manage a team with I think 40 plus now. So I'm constantly on some sort of process of HR. So you learn a lot through that. Again, finance, my knowledge of finance has grown hugely since I've worked in football. You find yourself having to learn a lot of stuff, IT again. So yeah, I think you go in with one area, but as you grow, you tend to have to kind of like Dimitri said, you pick up a lot across those different areas.
I think from what I've sort of heard you say there, Tom, for me, between that's really key for our sort of viewers here is careers aren't linear. I guess it's probably the first one there, and the flexibility is essential. Yep. The second is hard work is key, especially within the sports industry. And the third one is the sort of the power and the ability of connections and networking and all of those things. Absolutely essential. I know Dimitri's going to talk about that when he gets to one of his later questions. So, but for me, I think it's just worth just sort of, I guess, circling those three things because you've made them, and they're very key things for me across the whole sector. So, just to sort of draw that out.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like I say, I've done a few of these sorts of things now, and the question that always comes up is that whole what's the golden answer, or what's going to get me to football? And I think, like you say, is the combination. To me, it's hard work and networking are probably the two most important ones. I don't think it's always the smartest people that get the job. I don't think it's always the smartest person that creates an opportunity. I think it's a combination of perseverance, I think, and I think determination is the one thing. I think as long as it's managed determination and it's not, overbearing and over demanding sort of stuff, I think you've got to really put yourself, because again, like you guys will know, it's super competitive. If we put a job out, we get hundreds of people, and people want to take a pay cut, people want to leave really good jobs to come work for us because they're just desperate to work in football. And that's the thing, is that there's probably not a misperception, but that working in football must be like being Beyonce's PA. You must get this amazing lifestyle, and it must be like, you get to travel the world and hang around with football players, and it's just like, nah, it's a business. Like, our office is like any other office. Like, the Saturdays are great fun, and you might get some bits in between, but other than that, it's a business. Like, I think that's always one of my. I met someone earlier in my football career that said to me, working in football is a lifestyle, and I've always thought since then that was the complete opposite. Like, anyone that sees football as a lifestyle, as a career, is for the wrong reasons, because it isn't. It simply isn't. It's a lot of hard work, late hours. Yeah, if you look at the amount of hours you put in, it's way above any other role you probably have, and it's erratic, it's difficult, it's challenging, it can be incredibly frustrating, but the highs balance it out, because when it is good, it is really, really good. And if you like football and if it's your passion, then it's great fun.
I think that's great. Thank you very much, Tom. That's really good. Chris, I'm coming across to you now, if that's all right with you. Can you talk to us a little bit about your role at Deloitte, and sort of the role that you played within the sort of the Football Money League that's famous, I guess, with Deloitte?
Yeah, no problem. So I spent 3.5 years at Deloitte Sports Business Group prior to moving across to UCFB, where I currently am now. Predominantly, obviously, client work, paying the bills, so consultancy work, working with clubs, leagues, governing bodies, and a wide array of different projects, be it financial, commercial, strategic, be it doing placements at clubs, be it offering sports finance classes to universities, geographically as well around the world, not just UK, so a hugely variety in terms of job, and very enjoyable in that respect as well. Obviously, what we're well known for, or what Deloitte are well known for, is the Money League and the Annual Review of Football Finance. Money League a little bit more well known because that tends to be the first time that we have that collated picture of all the financials of the clubs for the latest financial year coming out in January, which is usually before clubs have put their financial statements out in the main. So it generates a bit of excitement, who made the most money, who's the richest, etc. Obviously, revenue generation is one thing, how you spend it's another, granted, but at the same time, yes, it's always interesting to see who is the club that is generating the most amounts of revenue. And quite frequently these days, given the amounts of broadcast and commercial revenues flying around the Premier League, quite a lot of the top 20 will be made up of English Premier League teams. Sometimes, you'll have 78% of some clubs' revenues coming from that Premier League broadcast rights deal compared to their match day and commercial bases, and they'll still be around 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, etc. Putting that together was always fun. Obviously, when there's no actual published financials, you've got to do things very confidentially. A lot of clubs would trust Deloitte to provide their figures, their financials, before they're in the public domain. And also on top of that, there would be that process of aligning, so to speak. So some clubs will put different amounts in different buckets, might have recognised things differently. I wasn't involved in the latest Money League because I've left since, granted, but from what I can tell, a huge amount of work went in just to try and work out who had recognised what revenues when it comes to COVID. With the season finishing in the summer and most financial year ends finishing in May, you have a situation where there's a lot of revenue that's getting pushed into 2021 that's actually still affiliated with the previous season, and as such, treatments have to be aligned in order to try and make sure you've got that concrete understanding of exactly and fairly how you're ranking teams within that publication. But yeah, a lot of fun to put together, as you might imagine, reflecting on what Tom says, a lot of hard work at the same time. I put more than my fair share of hours in when I was in my time at Deloitte, but equally, when you're on a good project and you see some great outcomes, yeah, it can be extremely enjoyable at the same time. But those publications, yes, very much an interesting and enjoyable part of the role, principally as well because you're seeing something which you're putting work into, getting global exposure. I mean, the pride I took when seeing revenue figures or transfer figures, etc., being reported in the global media, and I might have known that I maybe have come to one of those figures myself in the course of my work. I took huge amounts of pride out of that. I might not have my name attached to it, granted, but seeing your work advertised in that respect around the world and knowing that you're kind of generating that global interest continually within the world of football finance was something to really take pride in.
Give us an idea, just quickly there, Chris, on scale and timelines and stuff. So if you were sort of assessing a club, let's take Everton, just because there's someone in the room with that. If you were looking at Everton, for example, how long would it take you to compile that data for the Money League with that club? An average. I'm not talking about obviously specifics, but
it would depend on complexity. So in the main, again, because you're in a situation where usually financials aren't published yet, a template would get sent out to clubs for them to fill in, send back with any explanations as to how they're bucketing match day broadcast and commercial per our strict instructions and guidance in terms of what we expect in those buckets. Might be a bit of realignment required, because if they do things a certain way and they don't want to adjust them, then we'd be making the adjustment ourselves. But usually it'd be a straightforward case of collating the data, analysing it, and it'd be less so the actual bringing in the data, but more the analysis of it, looking for patterns, trends, rankings, making sure everything is spot on and correct. That would take most of the time. And the one thing that I learned in my time there is that when you're putting anything out to the media, when it comes to reporting on club financials, you've got to get it right, especially if it's stuff that isn't actually in the public domain yet. Mm-hmm. So as such, the amount of time and effort that went into version control and making sure that everything you had in front of you was spot on, perfect, and ties back to the source it came from, that's where most of the efforts went, that attention to detail, that pride in your work, that making sure that what we're putting out there is indeed factually correct. Because the worst thing you can do potentially, I would imagine, is if you put something out there intended to generate great PR and actually it's wrong, it would have the negative effect of that.
Absolutely, yeah. And are we talking about hours, days, weeks? Just give a broad example for the people listening to get a feel for what we're talking about, timelines there to do that sort of work.
Those publications tend to get put together by teams of about 4 or 5 consultants. Not as a full-time piece of work, because obviously the chargeable client work comes alongside that as well. So you've got to juggle. So you've got, juggling priorities there for a start. But these publications tend to start the ball rolling maybe 3-4 months, sometimes in advance. Money League, I'd probably say about 3 months. Annual review will be a bit longer because you've got more data to collect from all those different sets of financial statements.
Cool, yeah. Just trying to give people a bit of a scope there on sort of the size and the sort of the amount of work that's got to go into that. Thank you very much, Chris. It's great. Before I take the next question, we've had one question so far, which I'm going to ask after I've asked the next one, so put that down. But it's just really to remind everyone that you've got these guys for another sort of 20 minutes or so. I've got probably 10-15 minutes of questions left. Just it's your chance to really sort of ask any specific questions that you want answering by them while we're in this session. Now's your chance. So get that in the chat box so that we can make sure you're not left without an answer to your question. For this one, Dimitri, I'm coming to you, and I really want you to have a chat with us. Really, just explain more about your role, and then sort of alongside that, if it's not in your current role, what's your sort of career highlight of what you've done? Give us sort of the gem in your crown as such. So yeah, just talk to us about your roles.
Yeah, first of all, I could listen to Chris forever because this is my background. I come from banking. I love budgets. I love numbers, and that's kind of what led me into sports. So coming from a project management background inside banks, I first got involved in sports in the Greek Olympics. And I think just to answer that second question, that would be the pinnacle of my career so far, just because it was in my home country. And okay, at 48 years old, I'm 28 years outside Greece now. But still, it's my home country, and having the Olympics in Greece with 12,500 people working, 45,000 volunteers, it grows. And the reason I got that job was because of my banking and budgeting background, because I managed the 3rd biggest budget in the Olympics. So that would be my pinnacle of the career. But that's what kind of transformed me into project management. And after doing my 5-6 years in the consultancy world in the UK, like Chris, I just happened through networking. And I agree with Tom. So I think the most important thing in this industry, the networking was, oh, what do you do down there in Qatar? And this was a guy he's now in the FIFA World Cup. He goes, I'm working in football and we won the Asian Cup. I'm like, really? Here's my CV. And literally that CV hired me as the head of PMO down here. And that would be my career since. So I'm head of projects. I do a lot of strategic. I've set up the Arab Gulf Cup Football Federation, which is a federation of 8 associations. We set it up from scratch. which means a lot of statutes, policies, commercials, everything from HR frameworks to financial frameworks to procurement frameworks. So a lot of mundane things, but when you put them all together, the end product is really cool. And I'll answer one thing that popped up. What would you give your advice to your younger self? I think in my career, because again, luck and hard work brought me where I am. But if I can go back when I was doing my MBA, I would have done my /JD MBA, which was the legal. If I had that legal, because yes, after 20 years of doing contracts, we're good at looking at contracts. But how many hours have I lost looking at contracts and trying to find the details and giving it to lawyers and getting reviews and then 3 sets of lawyers? Oh, I won't go into it. So if I could go back in time, I would probably try to get my JD degree just to have the legal background on paper. Although now I'm pretty good at it after so many years. But that's been my career. It's been a lot of sport events and a lot of it. I will disagree with Tom a little bit just because I've been lucky. My career did have the glamour the past 11 years, just because I am where I am. So the Middle East did have the first class business tickets. It did have sitting next to Shevchenko and next to Ronaldo and next to Messi. I've never been in that. I've never been so. I love the industry, but I've never been somebody that will take my phone and snap until only one time, and that's even when Maradona was there. When Maradona was there, I just had to take that shot and take that video because it would be my first and last time to see him. But my career in football has been glamorous. I can't lie about it, but I never really cared about it. Okay, at one point, I'll finish with this. I'm coming back from almost a month round trip around Asia. Yes, you're first class and on the airplane, and my laptop shuts down. It literally just died on me. My boss, who is in FIFA and he's the vice president of AFC now, he comes to me and goes, Dimitri, enough. Your computer is telling you something. Stop working. Yes, it's nice, but literally look out the window, look out the city, go see a museum. So it's too much, too hard work when you're doing this industry. And yes, the highs pass the lows, but oh my God, I have to say that it did have a glimpse of glamour on my end. People were like, can you just hire me and I'll carry your suitcase? I'm like, come on, man. So I have to admit that it did have glamour on my end, and it wasn't soft. It just came with the job.
Now that everyone's really jealous, Dimitri,
yeah, I know. I'm going
to ask, just because you touched on the question that came into the chat box there, I'll finish answering that with everyone else. So I'll go to you first, Tom, if you don't mind. What piece of advice would you give to yourself, sort of looking back at your younger part? You can choose at what point of your younger career, but at what point would you give yourself some advice, and what would it be?
God, good question. Well, first of all, seek out Demetrius on LinkedIn because he's also got much more in life than I have. So make friends with this guy because he's got some cool stuff going on.
I've ticked that off to do after.
Yeah. That's the first bit of advice. The second bit would be, to be honest, I think my career, I say career, it's like a quite arrogant way of talking about it, but where I am to now is probably a really good example of actually not having a plan was the best plan, because actually I ended up being here through no strategy or intention, and I'm much happier now than I would have been probably if I'd have followed my initial plan. So I think that whole, again, a bit cliche, but that willingness to fail is definitely something to not be afraid of, because I don't know many people that are at my age or plus that are in their job they had from day one and are exactly as happy as they thought they were going to be. Like most people I know have failed. Some of my best friends are successful business people who've had a series of really catastrophic failures in other industries or careers, and now have ended up having their one idea and they've done really well out of it. And that's the thing, is that you only need that one great decision or that one great idea to take you where you need to be. And if you're afraid of giving stuff a go or afraid of trying stuff, then that's when I think you really struggle. But even down to age, like I say, I did my master's at 26, and at that point, most people think, is it worth the gamble? It cost me a fortune. I had to put every penny I had into it because you paid for it up front, and it was a lot of money. So, I had to stop working for a year at that age. That was difficult. I had to cover cost of living, but it was a gamble. But I felt passionately about it, and it's paid off. So again, it's just that whole kind of following your gut a little bit as well. If you get a feeling for something, or if you really feel passionate about it, that's probably telling you something to a degree. So in terms of advice, it probably would be kind of relax a bit, I guess, actually, and don't stress about it too much, because I think most people end up hopefully where they should be at some point. It might just take you a bit longer than other people, but I don't think sometimes holding people up as like a holy grail of like, look how perfect this person's career has been actually is beneficial, because it's fairly unobtainable. That thing of, perfect progression at a perfect pace, perfect qualifications. It's, there's very few people like that I've come across in football that are genuinely good. Most people I know in football that are brilliant have actually come from really strange backgrounds, or have ended up working. I know people who are club secretaries on the football side who started in the ticket office and they've just ended up working there. I know people that have come from completely different backgrounds. So, I would say, take your time, relax, have fun as well along the way. Like I say, just, that's probably a broader question around advice to younger me. But I think, just enjoy that part of your life, and you'll end up getting there eventually. But don't panic and don't stress. And
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tom. And Chris, one piece of advice?
Funnily enough, I completely kind of reflect on what Tom says there in its entirety, because it very much applies to me as well. And I did have a plan to get into sport, and it's something I laid out at the age of when I left school, basically, in terms of undergrad, professional qualification, graduate scheme, MBA specialising in sport, and hopefully it does the trick. And it worked, which is wonderful. So that's one piece of hindsight which I don't have any regrets on. But at the same time, I was probably a bit too stringent on myself. I think the world of sport now, working it, is a lot more organic than I appreciated. And while I had the best intentions in terms of putting together a jigsaw of experience and qualifications which would get me where I wanted to get to, and it paid off, granted, I probably forewent a lot of things in the process, experience-wise, settling down-wise, etc., because I was so focused on one goal. When in actual fact, looking back, I could have probably made it happen. Granted, with similar steps, such as the maths I did in sport, granted, but I probably didn't need to be quite so hard on myself in terms of getting to that finish line over the course of 10 years or so, whatever it was. So, I agree with Tom there entirely. You can take a more organic approach and still have a plan. You don't have to be too stringent and too hard on yourself to get to your goals, because if you put your heart to it, you will eventually get there, whatever the way.
I think that's great advice across the board there. And I think give the little bit of UCFB context to it is the probably not looking for the perfect sort of first role as well. I know that was the case with me. With my personal career, I put a lot of pressure on that very first job I got when I left university, and expected that to be the thing that made or break me, and it really hasn't been. I think listening to both you, Chris, and you, Tom, then that's very much what you're saying to yourselves there as well. So just for everyone to sort of bear that in mind, really. So we're moving into the last few questions now. So Tom, we're going to go to you for this one, then Dimitri, then to Chris. In that order, these should be the last ones we're asking, unless we get any more come up in the chat box at this stage. So Tom, yours is two parts, because I've got the question that we've got for you, and I've got one question that's come from the chat window. So from my perspective, what I want to know is, students looking to sort of make their way into sports marketing and that side of things, how do they make themselves known? How do they get themselves to sort of stand out in sort of the world in that respect? And the sort of follow-on question which comes from the chat window is a little bit about how rewarding working within that sector is. You briefly touched on that before, but you can answer them in whichever order you'd like, Tom, but they're the two I'd like you to answer.
Yeah, no worries. I think in terms of this kind of the holy grail question of how do I get a job of it in football as a whole, or particularly in marketing, how do I stand out? Again, when we put roles out, we get a lot of applicants, and a lot of people are very similar. So it's, you get a lot of graduates with similar degrees and similar backgrounds. It's, and again, I'll admit to this, I skim CVs, because that's what everyone has to do when you're shortlisting people. You look for that something that jumps out, whether it's in the bio, whether it's in the cover letter. Doing a cover letter in itself shouldn't have to be advice, but do a cover letter. It's fairly fundamental. The amount of people that just give you a JD and I'm like, this is a series of biographic information. It's not telling me anything. It's literally just dates. It's like Wikipedia. It's not like tell me something about you, but also tell me about the role that shows that you understood the role and that you're interested. So again, tell me why you're suitable for the role. Tell me what appeals to you about it. Tell me your initial ideas about what you could do in the role. Again, it sounds really fairly basic stuff, but again, it's really important for you to show that you've done a bit of homework. Again, the amount of times we get applicants, they've just clearly copied and pasted an application from another job, and they just changed the team name or just changed and it's like, just take 10 minutes of time to learn about Everton. Go online, say, I just see you did this. It looks great. Did you think about this? Or, we've done this somewhere else. Or I did an essay with one of my modules that suggested this. Again, tell me why you have experience. Don't just say I have a degree and these are the dates, because there's no context to that. Just give me something more. So I think making your approach to a person or a role personable, again, that's the same on LinkedIn as well. If you're going to network, do it properly and like show an interest, and don't, why should someone accept your connection? What is it about you that's worth being connected to? It's just having that extra little bit of detail, taking a bit of time. I think getting experience, which I know is very hard, is very important. So whether that's voluntary experience, whether you've done a project for someone, get some sort of experience on your CV. Because again, when I'm looking at 200 people and they've all got the same degree, it needs something else. So whether you're volunteering at your local amateur football club, whether you're a League Two team or an international team, try and do something for them. Whether it's a project, don't charge for it, do it for free. Just say, look, I'm willing to do something for you, but just get something on your CV, which is actual work with a football club. So whether it's, I want to do a report on your season ticket campaign, would you like me to help you? Or I'd like to do a piece of work around this. Most clubs at that level will be grateful for the support. So it should be a win-win for them, because they'll take the support, you get experience, everyone's winning. So and again, I know that's easier said than done, but that is what would make the difference for me of looking at someone. Is like, oh, this person did 3 months at X club and they did it. Okay, fair enough. Because A, it shows they've tried. B, it shows they've got commitment, irrespective of the work. There's a level of commitment they've had to use to get to that point anyway. So things like that make a difference. That's like I say, that's my view. I know some people look very much at grades and what level of university you went to. Again, that's probably more prevalent in finance, HR, sort of more professional industries, but for marketing, I never really dwell on what university it was. It's not, I think that stuff doesn't really sort of do it for me. So that's kind of how I would encourage people to get involved. And the second question around how rewarding, very is the answer. So again, one of the reasons that I am still working in football as opposed to working for a brand or an FMCG and earning more money and having an easier life is that actually, A, I love sport, but B, the product is special. And again, not every person can say they market a product that people, and I mean love as in it's like an emotional response. So like, you could work for Mars bars, people like Mars bars. I'm sure some people actually love Mars bars, but to the extent of being upset about it. But when you work in football and your product is, say Everton's a really good example, but Everton is not just a football club in this community. It's like a church. It's a pillar of the community. So when we do something, it moves people for good or bad, up and down. If we do something over in the community, or if we have a good result or something else, it makes a massive difference to people's lives up here. Really, and of all the cities I've lived in, Liverpool is a huge football city, as people know. It's like 90% of everything up here is either Liverpool or Everton. So when you're working with that sort of product, you make a real difference. That sounds again a bit cliche, but like when we do a campaign, people like it. You hear people talking about it, or you hear on the street or mates of people, and you don't get that with many products. There's not many marketing things that you can do where you can actually feel and see and hear how it's working and get that feedback. So yeah, it is very rewarding. Like I say, it's not easy and it is hard work, but it's definitely, when it's done well and you enjoy it, it's pretty unique. Again, the guys will probably vouch for this. There's not many other industries I know where you get that feeling. Yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, John. They're two great answers there. Thank you. Dimitri, on to you now. Two-part question for you as well. Just to everyone else, we are going to overrun slightly here. Please bear with us if you can. I'm going to try and keep it to the next 10 minutes or so, but we are going to slightly overrun. So Dimitri, you've worked sort of home and abroad, and obviously at the moment you're abroad right now. What would you say to individuals who are looking for a possible career sort of overseas, sort of post-graduation or at some point in their career? What sort of advice would you give to them on that?
Exactly what Tom said. Get into these events, and maybe it's a football, maybe it's sport, but you can't get in the events that are around the region. And I'll take it a step further. I agree with Tom in the sense, make an effort for your CV, but even make an effort in LinkedIn. In our days, and I'm not saying our days that I'm so old, but I used to use the Filofax. I had to go through and check who had a birthday and send a birthday note. So networking in my days used to be much more difficult. I love doing it. So when Facebook came along and LinkedIn came along, it was much, much easier. But I will say this to you, you get in these small events, you volunteer, there's hundreds of jobs out there. And okay, this is maybe a Greek example, but if you are used to having your mother bring you the orange juice next to your bed every morning and you can't get used to that, then no, this is not for you. You stay where you are, try to find something local, and you're never going to get out of your house. But if you do want to work abroad, it's easier now, and it's easier with the network. What I will say as advice is, these people you meet at that project, they're all going to grow like you, and they're probably going to go in different countries, in different elements, in different areas. If you keep that network, they're going to grow with you. And it might come to a point where it comes to our career that you don't send a CV. It's the LinkedIn, it's a network, and it's, hey, man, do you have a job? Or, hey, I have a job opening. Before I even publish it, I was thinking of you. And this is how it happens these days. And I can't say anything more about the networking. I'm a nomad. I've worked in 27 countries. I've lived full time more than 3 months in 6 of them. So how else are you have to have that networking connection. There's no other way you can get a job and move into the next job, only through this. And it's easier now. It's so much easier for the young generation. That's the only thing I can offer. Just get in there, volunteer, prepare your CV. I agree with the cover letter. I agree with, the normal, don't give a CV out with spell and error and spell checks. Just give it some thought. And they're so easier. Don't use Word. Just go on to Canva, which is a free software that you can make a nice CV now, and it doesn't have to be a Word document. It's so easy to make your CV different. And I will say that the moment I got sick with CVs was when I was working in the Olympics, because by European law, I had to interview 10% of the CVs I was sent by law, which means that for 47 positions that we had on my department, you could just put the numbers down when every position had 1,000 applicants. I had by law to interview. So skimming is not even a word. It's 10 minutes, hi, goodbye, and if I remember something to put on this person. So you only have a small time to make an impression. Just come on, as you say, you interview for Everton. Come on, make an introduction, do some research, write something about it. And I have a rule, especially with LinkedIn, because I get bombarded. Unfortunately, not for a good reason. I get bombarded a lot from player agents and footballers, although that's not my field. So I just have to delete. But if it's somebody that I don't know, and if it doesn't come from my background of either Greece, either America, or the Middle East, if there's no introduction on LinkedIn, if there's not a hi, delete. I don't have the time. I just need something. Tell me something about yourself, why I should connect with you. Sorry, I mean, that'd be a bit harsh, but in the world, come on, make an effort. Make an effort.
I think it's valid. I often get a lot of ads from students or from prospective students that want to show their interest in UCFB, and I'm very much of a similar thought, and I'm probably not getting them anywhere near the volume that you are, Dimitri. So yeah, I think that's very valid. Just there's a slight add-on to that for you, Dimitri. If we would say 3 ingredients to succeed with sport, what would they be for you?
Tom took one: perseverance. I mean, it's an industry, and especially football. Yes, it's changed, but you do have a lot of old timers, a lot of people that have grown through the ranks of being a footballer, and they just become general secretary or a position in power, and they can't understand change. So I think you need perseverance for that. But other than that, adaptability, patience, adaptability. Now the industry is changing so fast that if you don't follow, you're not gonna get along. But because it does have a mixture of old generation people and newcomers, yeah, just be adaptable. That's the only way you can succeed in this industry.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dimitri. Chris, onto your final question for the afternoon. 2-parter again for you. What do you think, for those looking to start their career within sports finance, what do you think they need to do to look to do that?
Okay, if you want to get into a specific role when it comes to sport and finance, it's obviously very niche to begin with. You've got to be realistic and understand that, yeah, if you want a generic finance role, plenty going, graduate schemes galore. Targeting that directly at football or wider sport as your first role, ambitious. I'll be honest, ambitious, simply because the number of roles out there will be minute compared to the demand that's actually going in that respect. So anyone I speak to says to me, how do I go about, getting into a team like Deloitte or working in finance in the club, etc. I always encourage them to try and take a longer term viewpoint of building up their skill sets for a start. So that might mean going and doing a graduate scheme in an industry or an accountancy firm and getting a professional qualification, because then you've got that business foundation that you can apply to the world of sport, and you've got something to your name, professional accreditation, which is actually going to stand you in better stead compared to other candidates who may not have that. Alongside that, though, and it's reflecting on what the guys have said already, granted, it's all about distinguishing yourself. So if you've made an effort in some way or form on your CV to make it clear you're not just a fan, that you have some kind of established interest in the business of sport or football, etc., that you've been maybe posting on LinkedIn in some way or form in terms of your ideas, your blogs, your opinions on certain matters, that's the way to go about it in terms of combining then expertise with dedicated and factual interest. The number of CVs I've seen over the course of time, especially in some of my prior roles where it's just like, there's nothing on here to do with sport at all. And similar again to what they're saying about volumes of CVs, something will be great and it'll be hidden away at the bottom of page 2. And I'll say to the guys, look, chances are the recruiter looking at the CV will not read past the first 5-6 lines. So make those first 5-6 lines absolutely amazing. What do you want them to know about you in respect to your background, why you're right for the role, what interests you about the business of sport, particularly in relation to the job you're applying for? It's usually a high-level summary at the start, because all that takes is for someone to read that and they're drawn in. They don't see that automatically, as Tom said, as Dimitri said, where Laura allows them to. It gets put down, it gets put away because they're not seeing something quick enough to hit the mark. So definitely professional expertise for a start where possible if you're willing to play the longer game. If you're not and you do want to get in there quicker, then it comes down to networking. It really does come down to networking, because once you're in, you can move around quite freely, and all it takes is to message the right person at the right time, and they may have something on the table which is suitable, and they might go, oh, actually, yeah, you're great for this role. And otherwise, they may not have come across you. They might not even advertise it externally. It might be entirely internal. You just happen to come across them at the right time. Plenty of examples of that in my experience of people I've worked with who have done just that and got into roles just because they've happened to reach out to the right person at the right time. So clear, dedicated interest in what you're doing for a start. Longer term game would be, yes, maybe professional qualification, but shorter term, just networking, because the more people you're getting in touch with, targeted, not just, as Dimitri says, hitting the connect button, hoping for the best, targeted networking, you never know what doors are open for you.
I think that's a really good point. I'm not even going to ask you the second part, Tom, Chris, because you nailed it there. It was asking sort of what the key skills and attributes for a sort of a sports graduate. And I think you've just nailed that sort of within that. So I'm not gonna push you for that. So, guys, I've got one last question for you, which has just come in from the chat box from Noah. Noah, apologies, but I'm going to rephrase this slightly for the guys to answer. And very quickly, I'm going to hear from all three of you. I'll start with Dimitri, go to Tom, then finish with Chris. In terms of sports decision making in organisations, what are the top objectives, would you say, are there, and where does sort of fan satisfaction fall within those objectives? Dimitri, first, if you wouldn't mind.
It's one of the top, because if you have a way to measure it, like Tom said, you can sell your product, you can sell your organization, your product better. Sometimes you can't control it, especially when we're talking about event planning. I'm not going to be an expert, like Tom says, when you do this on a daily basis, you can measure it better. But when you're talking about an event that happens every 1-2 years, very, very important, but sometimes not always controllable, especially if there are politics involved. But it's extremely important, because that's what you will sell to your broadcasters, that's what you will sell to your sponsors. It is a very critical element. And when you plan for it, it's good to have it. When you don't think about it and you kind of push it aside and you think about it at the end, it's too late. It's too difficult to plan for it at the end.
Fab. Thank you very much, Dimitri. Tom?
Yeah, it's like, this is a big question. As a wrap up, it's a really broad question. I think, again, it comes down to, if you say, right, we'll define fan satisfaction first of all. That's a whole hour conversation of what is satisfaction. Yeah. Is it, and again, what you've got to remember is that football is only like any other product. It comes down to a very crude value exchange. Is the person happy with what they are receiving for what they are giving? And whether that's giving me an email address or giving me £500 or giving me £20,000, are they receiving value in exchange? That's the quickest measure. But again, what we need to remember now with football is that with it being global and much more data driven, is actually the days of me just having 30,000 local people giving me £500 each are gone, because now I have people in Asia, Africa, America giving me their email address. So to them, that's a small exchange, but actually, if you pile enough of them into one big pot, you suddenly get quite a lot of data, which then is worth quite a lot of money. So for those people, it's an easy exchange. Oh, no, I want to enter a competition, I want to play a game, here's my email address, that's fine. But actually, if I do enough of those, then suddenly it's, that is a big value to that. But also their satisfaction, you don't really think of it as like, oh, they're not really fans, but actually they are, because that's where we're growing. That's where the money's going to come from in the future. It's not necessarily local people. That's the core of it. But like Christopher said, going on, the percentage of revenue that is ticketing led is decreasing year on year. So, whilst our core fans are here and they are viewing the experience, the majority of our money in the future will come from people across the globe. So actually their satisfaction is as important as local people, but people tend to measure the people in the stadium because they see them as like actual fans. Everyone else is just on the outside. It's like, no, it's more holistic than that. So again, it's a very, very good question, but it's very open. But I think, but I think that's what you need to think now is that where are the fans? What are they giving in exchange? And is each one of them happy? And not taking local people for granted, but also not taking for granted the people that are offering you more as well internationally. So yeah, good question.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Tom. That's a great answer. And Chris, to you, final words on the matter.
Ultimately, it comes down to what you define as fan satisfaction again, because football's a very different product to most. It's pretty inelastic. If a normal business, so you buy something from a retailer and it's a poor product, likely chances are you won't do business with that retailer again. In football, if your team does rubbish on the pitch for a couple of weeks in a row, or as we see Liverpool right now having a pretty run of form altogether, poor run of form altogether, those fans aren't going to turn away. They're going to carry on in situ. So as such, your fan satisfaction is a case of how well the team does. Technically speaking, fans might voice unhappiness or discontent with ownership, etc., but they're still going to be there pretty much through thick and thin. Financially speaking, tends to be revenue maximisation, because the virtuous circle of football means the more revenue you've got, the more you can invest in wages and transfers. Hopefully, the better you do on the pitch, and the more revenue you generate, and round you go. But obviously, sometimes there's that fine balance between revenue generation and keeping your fans on side at the same time. You don't want to, for example, raise your ticket prices too high, and at the same time disillusion fans who can no longer afford to come to your games. That wouldn't particularly be great in terms of that wider PR angle.
Fab. Thank you very much, Chris. And I think
Andy,
just to wrap that
can
up,
I just intervene 1 second? I'll leave it an open question. Tom, about a couple of years ago, I saw a VR helmet, which is the one that we're used to, but it was the best quality football I've had. And you have a golden ticket, which means you have the best seat in the club, which in theory means you can sell 20,000 of those and have no fans in. But do you, as Tom, want that? Do you want that revenue from the 20,000 VR people and not having any fun? I'm leaving it as an open question. So what is fan satisfaction? That you could get your budget with VR glasses, but ethically for football, is that what we want for our future? I don't know. I'll leave it open. I think
I'm not going to ask you to answer that, Tom. But
the answer is anyway. The answer is you can have both, so it's fine.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think the key part here, which comes from the question itself, the decision-making process itself, Noah. I think you need to consider what you're actually deciding and what that decision-making process is. And I think what all three of them have sort of emphasised there is, what is that satisfaction that you're referring to? What does success look like on top of that generally? So it's being clear within your own thoughts and sort of feelings around that, really. And I think they've all sort of emphasised that in their own particular way, and in the fact the way they answered them, and particularly didn't answer in certain areas, because it's not a really one that could be particularly nailed down. So I think that's grand. Thank you very much, everyone. That was really great. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Dimitri. You are welcome at this stage to close your microphones and turn your cameras off and enjoy a glass of water. And thank you very much for being involved this afternoon. Massive thanks to you all.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone. So that's about it for us this afternoon. Wrap this up now. So again, big thanks to our speakers, Tom, Chris and Dimitri, for giving up their time and speaking us for this afternoon, and for taking your questions and for answering the questions that we had for them in such a professional manner and with some great detail. With more industry speakers sessions coming up later this week, all of which our applicants are welcome to attend. Tomorrow we're focusing on the media-based programs that we have with speakers from ITV, Sky and Queen's Park Rangers. Next week we'll be chatting to some of our existing UCFB students so that they can learn more about studying with us from the students themselves. And don't forget, on a very special session that we're running on the 24th of March, where we'll be joined from one of our special guests from the League Managers Association. UCFB students get an exclusive access to these top-level football managers on a regular basis. This will be your opportunity as a pre-student, as an applicant, to engage with that type of content, and your opportunity to find out what it's like and engage with them and learn from them directly. All of these sessions are bookable now, and you'll find the links within your emails. If you've got any questions at all regarding anything to do with this, or anything to do with the applicant process or studying at UCFB, please email us on study@UCFB, which is the email address on the screen at the moment, and we will get back to you as soon as we can with help and sort of advice and guidance with that. So thanks again for your attention and engagement this afternoon. We hope to see you again in the upcoming sections of the Applicant Experience Series. All the best and good luck. Thank you.